Paqueta, while Song Ho scored the consolation for the Koreans. The XG showed that the scoreline was fair, but how did Brazil dominate tactically? Let's take a look. And of course we'll be focusing on Brazil in possession. And throughout the game, Korea looked to be quite aggressive in the press, looking to press in a 4-4-2, whether Brazil were building up from a goal kick, or even in more open play situations. And because the front two were looking to press high on the centre-backs, the central midfielders had to back up the press in order to make it more difficult for Brazil to find their midfielders. But the obvious problem here is that they are 3 versus 2 down, and the extra man is a player as dangerous as Neymar. So Brazil could take advantage of this pressing shape from Korea in a few different ways, as it would be difficult for the backline to also back up this press because of the threat of the pace from wingers like Vinicius and Rafinha in behind, so they tended to have to sit slightly deeper, and this would open up more space for Neymar between the lines. So with Korea's midfield four slightly higher following an attack, Neymar's already threatening to find space between the lines. And again, Neymar is free because the Korean double pivot are more concerned with the Brazil pivots, and Brazil are eventually able to find him between the lines, taking several Korean players out of the game. But Neymar wasn't just a central, static target. In the deep build-up shape, Danilo liked to come central a lot, usually operating alongside Casemiro, and this would free up Paqueta to push up higher into the front line, with Neymar often drifting towards the left-hand side. And Lee was quite reactive to the movements of Danilo, so when Danilo came central, the winger tended to also be dragged central with him. So now, because of the front five, which outnumbered the Korean back four, and Lee being dragged central, there were several problems on the left-hand side, as if the fullback remained tight on Vinicius, Neymar would potentially be free. But if he came too narrow, Vinicius could then receive the ball and have a run on the fullback even when he came out. But if the fullback and the centre-back shifted across, Richarlison was also drifting across to the left-hand side, so he would have a lot more space to attack, and it would be difficult for the rest of the backline to shift across, once again because of this overload. So Neymar began to use the presence of Vinicius, which would have the fullback, as a sort of shield, as now he could freely drop into this left position to receive the ball from the centre-back or the midfielders, and have space to turn and run at the defence, would prove to be dangerous. Danilo has come in central here, and the winger is initially drawn towards him, and this opens up an easy passing lane to Neymar, who is looking to drop into this space. So now Neymar can receive behind the winger, and not only that, Vinicius now has an easy 1 versus 1 against his fullback. And because of that front five we discussed, with Paqueta pushing up, the left back is drawn onto him, so Rafinha can receive the ball. Danilo's in possession, and once again, the right winger is drawn towards him. And as we can see, Korea's own pivots like to back up the press, so he is moving on to Casemiro, who has dropped deeper. And this leaves a massive gap between the defense and the midfield that Neymar can look to drop into. And once he does, having drawn the fullback in, Brazil have plenty of numbers in advanced positions. And again, the fullback is drawn onto Rafinha, and Paqueta, pushing high because of Danilo's cover deeper, runs into the half space and has a decent shot on goal. The way most teams deal with this is by not pressing high in the 4-4-2, and instead getting their forwards to drop onto the pivots, allowing their own pivots to then operate in these deep regions, which would have allowed them to cover the movements of Neymar, for example, whilst Lee could then have stayed deeper to help a 2 versus 1 situation. But instead, their default shapes facilitated a 2-3-5 higher up from Brazil, with Militao occasionally pushing higher up to join Danilo and Casemiro, whilst Danilo did often drift to the left-hand side, higher up. And higher up, Korea did defend in a narrower 4-4-2, with their wingers often tucking in. But this still led to problems for them because of the 1 versus 1 ability of the likes of Vinicius and Rafinha out wide. As if Brazil were able to work it out wide, the winger could either take his man on directly, or look to combine with his man in the half space, as they had somewhat of a 2 versus 1 against the fullback. And Japan struggled with this wide overload, leading to danger. Then here we have an example of Brazil's shape. It could be a back 3, although Militao could also push into this midfield position when needed. 2 in the midfield, as well as that front 5 against the 4 of South Korea. So once again, in the lead up to the goal, you can see that Brazil do have their front 5 against the back 4. So Rafinha receives the ball, and Paqueta is making the run into the half space, although he's not found, and Rafinha instead cuts in. Rafinha is able to cut in and play a 1-2 with Paqueta, and importantly, the right back has been drawn in, meaning that Vinicius is free, once again because of that 5 versus 4. So eventually, Vinicius has a ton of space for him to find the finish. But South Korea's attacking strategy also left them extremely vulnerable, so let's give that a quick examination. In an attacking sense, South Korea went for it in this match, whilst Brazil were content to defend in a 4-4-2 mid-block at times, especially after going up so early. And the Korean fullbacks were quite aggressive, and Lee tended to tuck in to be the third man, allowing his fullback to overlap, whilst Wang would hug the touchline, and Kim could either tuck into the midfield, but could also look to overlap Wang at times. So here we have the right back pushing higher up, and Kim playing in more of a number 10 position, whilst the left back is also looking to join the attack. So naturally there are large gaps left behind in defence. And when the ball was high, both Neymar and Richarlison tended to stay quite high up, So on the transition, Brazil could either find their wingers running in behind or their forwards for a 1 versus 1, and either way this was not ideal. So we saw Brazil get a lot of joy on the counter-attack, with the only surprise being they didn't score more on the break. Even when Korea were defending with deeper fullbacks, Brazil were aggressive in their defense, now pushing up their wingers even when defending. As on the break, it would now be 1 versus 1s, and they had a qualitative advantage in almost every position, allowing them to still be dangerous. So in this attack, both Korean fullbacks had pushed extremely high.